Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be here today with Jacob. He and I are the co-founders of Exponent, and today we're going to talk about interviewing and interviewing tips. Let's dive in.
Stephen, what do you think the most important mindset is to have when you go into an interview?
I think what I noticed is that people often think interviewing is about talking, but good interviewees know how to listen while they're going through the interview. So instead of just coming in, answering all these questions, and then leaving, they know how to kind of understand what the intent is of the interviewer.
Yeah, and asking the right questions rather than just talking.
Yeah, I think actually a really common mistake or a big tip that I give people is when you come into an interview and you get a question, despite your first instinct, just ask a question. Even if you're not sure what to ask, or even if you think like you understand it, showing you that you are asking a question actually shows that you are trying to understand the problem, which is always a good sign in an interview.
What's one thing you think candidates overlook when they're researching a company?
I think people often research a company, they look at the financials, they look at like what the company does. But one thing I find really effective in interviewing especially is to actually watch company keynotes of the CEO or of company leadership talking on YouTube or wherever you can find the videos. And that I think gives a really good sense of how the company culture is, how the company is talking about itself, what are some of the key terms, the key initiatives that the company is looking for. And I think if you come in there and say, hey, I'm already thinking kind of like an executive at your company, that's always a really, really good sign in an interview.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think like that way you also get a sense of like what they value, what their team values are, maybe what they're currently focused on or thinking about.
I think one thing that's really, really helpful in standing out in an interview and just making a really high level answer is thinking like the interviewer that's asking you the question. So the interviewer is in a role where they're in, some kind of hiring manager role maybe, or they're a peer, and they're thinking about this problem. They're trying to figure out the strategy, the why behind it, how it maps to the company's goals. And so the more that you can think like them and ask the questions that they're asking, I think that would really help you stand out in an interview. So for instance, if you come in and you have an interview with a hiring manager and they're asking you, a question about your role and all that stuff, I would almost ask the hiring manager, like, well, how are you thinking about this role? How are you thinking about the ROI for this role? How are you thinking about how this role would grow over time as it grows with the company? Sort of thinking from the perspective of them as much as possible, I think really stands out, because then it's showing the hiring manager or whoever you're interviewing with, hey, I can think at your level, like I can help you with your problems. Evaluating fit, it's always really helpful in an interview. I think people get it really wrong. They think an interview is about the company's evaluation of you as a candidate, but actually it's a two-way street. Like the company is interested in you, but you are also interested in the company. So it's always really helpful for an interview to remember, okay, like, do I actually want to work here? I have other options. I could keep interviewing. I'm maybe working at a current company. So how does this kind of fit with what I'm looking for?
Yeah, it's really, how do you sort of like balance that with kind of like having excitement and wanting to show that you're excited or passionate about what the company is working on, but also sort of evaluating like, hey, is this actually the right company for me?
There's lots of ways to do it. I think one thing that I think about sometimes is like, what are the previous experiences that I've had, and what are some of the values that I can distill from that? So for instance, I worked at very large companies like Google. I've also worked in startups, and I think there's certain patterns that I've noticed about what makes me an effective employee, or someone who would be excited to work at a company like that. So for instance, like scrappiness is something I really value, and I find that maps more with startups. And so I might come into the interview knowing in my head that I'm going to ask a little bit about, okay, how do you think about scrappiness? That's a core value for me. I'm really interested in that. So I think it's always a really helpful exercise before you go in through an interview process to actually think, okay, what are my past experiences? Where have I really shined? Where have I not shined as much? And then what are the core values from that I can apply to my candidate search where I'm looking for a new company?
One thing I'd recommend is sort of weaving in your own experiences, especially if you're telling stories or even if it's a technical interview. It really helps to sort of show that you're not just speaking theoretically, but you're sort of leaning on like, hey, I've encountered a challenge like this before. Here's kind of how I typically solve it, and show that you have like real experience to lean back on and a framework for thinking about how to think through the problem.
I think the number one thing that I would do after an interview is just check in on how I feel. Like, what am I feeling right now emotionally? Do I feel drained? Do I feel energized? Do I feel hopeful? Do I feel nervous? And I think that is actually a really good sign, because there's so much data in an interview, especially if you're doing an interview round where you're meeting 5 different people. Your system is all out of whack. So just like notice, okay, how am I feeling? You're probably gonna feel tired, but also, are you feeling like excited? Are you feeling a little nervous? And trusting your like intuition to have some indication, I think, is really helpful. And I think just generally seeing an interview process as an opportunity to network too is like really helpful too. So it's like, hey, I just did this interview. Maybe I will get the job, maybe I won't get the job, but I just really liked these people, or I'm just like really curious about what they're doing. And I think if you are curious authentically about it, that's a really good sign that you might want to work with these people, whether or not it's now and you get the opportunity, or maybe later down the line. But I think it's just always helpful to think about it. Okay, like, do I like this? Did I like the people? Did I like the experience that I went through? More than ever, personal connection is important. I see a lot of people using AI tools or impersonal approaches to interviewing, and more than ever, I'm seeing a human touch just goes a really, really long way. So whether or not that's a personalized message you send someone, using a connection or referral, going to a networking meetup, and just being authentically interested in what's happening in the companies there, I see that really making a candidate stand out.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think a lot of people are maybe trying to sort of brute force their way into things, and it probably works to send out 200 AI written cover letters and things like that. But I think ultimately, sort of connecting with someone or finding a company you're truly excited about and pitching yourself to them in a realistic way is going to be the way to go.
And using Exponent.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the conversation. Hope this was helpful, and good luck on your interviews.